And when I was thinking about this series and kind of putting the message together, it reminded me of when I was a little bit younger. You know, I had this idea that I wanted to make money. I wanted to make it an easy way. You know, I wanted to get money, and I wanted to set myself up to retire at the age of 40, right? Well, I'm 42, still working a full-time job, and realize that making money is not always as easy as it seems, right? I mean, I actually would get caught up. There was a period of time where I would get caught up in kind of these, get rich quick kind of ideas, right? Or these individuals that, they were in some kind of industry, maybe real estate or selling bonds or certificates, all these different things. But they were pretty successful, They made a certain amount of money, and they came up with a kind of a plan and idea of where they would show other people, right, how easy it was for them to make their money. And so they put on these little seminars, write these little books, and have you come write a check, and you would get the privilege of finding out how easy they made their money. Of course, if you're familiar with any of these kind of things, the majority of the people it doesn't work for, right? The majority of people doesn't work for. But what's so slick about it is these guys actually end up making more money showing people how easy they made money, right, than how they made their money in the first place, right? And there's nothing necessarily anything wrong with it. There are, anytime you get into trying to make money fast, trying to make money easy, there are those people that are really crooks, right? Those people that take advantage of people. And every now and then we'll, see a guy on the news with some investment scam or some other kind of thing where they basically took advantage of, hundreds of people and took their life savings, right? And these people now are kind of left in the wake of these guys. Their financial future is ruined, and these guys are kind of sitting there living it up in luxury because they basically just stole money from people. And every now and then we get a glimpse of these guys on the evening news, and we kind of, in a sense, it's good news, right? It's good news because these guys are out of the way. They're not taking advantage of people. And the reason I share that is when I was looking at this parable that we're going to look at today, it's about a guy that's kind of like these folks, right? It's about a guy who's crooked, right? A guy who is bad and who is using people for his own gain. And what makes it perplexing is the fact that it seems like Jesus is telling us to be like this guy. Jesus is saying, be like this guy. And so the parable that we're looking at today is the parable of the shrewd manager. Now, if you remember, a parable is a story, right, that kind of shares a moral or spiritual truth with us, right? And so Jesus used these parables, taught by parables, showed people God's truth, his disciples and other people, God's truth through these different kind of parables. And today, this parable, I believe Jesus used for a specific reason. He wanted to teach his disciples and us about the power of our generosity, right? Now, I have the privilege of being an Alpiner at a church where many Alpiners are very generous. And so it's exciting to be a part of that generosity. But Jesus taught this lesson for a reason. And I think it's good that we would take heed to the lesson that Jesus gives us about our generosity. So let's go ahead. We'll dig into it. It's going to be found in Luke chapter 16. And I'll just read through the parable and then kind of recap it at the end. So Jesus told this story to his disciples. There was a certain rich man who had a manager handling his affairs. One day, a report came, and that manager was wasting his employer's money. So the employer called him and said, "What's this I hear about you? Get your report in order because you are going to be fired." The manager thought to himself, now what? My boss has fired me. I don't have the strength to dig ditches. I'm too proud to beg. I know how to ensure that I'll have plenty of friends who will give me a home when I'm fired. So he invited each person who owed money to his employer to come and discuss the situation. He asked the first one, how much do you owe him? The man replied, I owe him 800 gallons of olive oil. And so the manager told him, take the bill and quickly change it to 400 gallons. And how much do you owe my employer? He asked the next man. I owe him 1,000 bushels of wheat, was the reply. Here, the manager said, take the bill and change it to 800 bushels. The rich man had to admire the dishonest rascal for being so shrewd. So let me recap this parable, this story. We've got a rich man, okay? And this guy is so rich that he's not even involved in the day-to-day operations of probably his estate, but all his businesses, right? What he's done is he's hired a manager to come in and take care of all that stuff for him. Well, one day he gets this report that the manager is either terrible at his job or a crook, right? The rich man, the report he gets is that he's losing money, and it's because of this manager. So he calls the manager in, hey, get the books together. I want to see what you've been doing, and I'm getting rid of you. You're terrible at your job, right? And of course, the manager is he's looking at his future. He's concerned about what he's going to do. I mean, as you can imagine, his references aren't going to look so good now. I mean, he's getting fired. He's probably not going to get himself another management job with any other rich guy in the area because he's probably got a reputation now of being dishonest, being terrible at his job. And so he's concerned. Not only is he losing his job, he's probably losing his house too. More than likely, he probably stays at his employer's residence in some way as part of the deal. And so his whole future is looking unsecure, right? He's decided that he doesn't like sweating, right? He's not the one to be digging ditches, so he's decided that, labor is not for me. He's probably walked past many people begging on the streets, and he sees that, that can't maintain the lifestyle that he's used to, so he's not going to beg, right? And so he comes up with this plan to make sure that once he gets fired, once he's out of a home, that he's going to be okay. And what he does is he calls in these guys that owe his boss a lot of money, right? A lot of money. The first guy, the 1,000 gallons of olive oil, they estimate that was worth about 3 years of a person's wages, right? And he tells this guy, hey, I'm going to give you a break. Cut that bill in half, 50% break, right? The next guy, 1,000 bushels of wheat. They estimate that to produce that 1,000 bushels of wheat is about 9 years worth of somebody's labor to produce that kind of stuff. And he gives this guy a 20% discount. Now, do you see what he's doing? Right? He's doing these guys such a big favor that when he gets booted, when he loses his job, what is he going to do? He's going to go to these guys and he's going to knock on their door, right? He's putting himself in a position that these guys are going to owe him, right? He's done such a great deal to them. If they turn him down when he's in need and everybody knows what he did for them, what's their reputation going to look like, right? And so he's kind of done this little deal, and his employer can't do anything about it, right? He actually does all this before he actually gets fired. And so his employer can't stop it. It's written in stone. It's done with. But he's got himself set up nice. And the craziest thing about this story is you would expect that his employer would be just furious, right? I mean, he's just in those two deals right there that manager did, his employer lost probably more than 3 years worth of income from those investments. 3 years worth of income from that, right? And what does the employer say? He says that he, that he admired him. He admired the guy, admired this manager that he's going to fire. He admired him for how shrewd he was, for the plan that he put in place to take care of himself. Now, can you imagine if that was us? Can you imagine if you owned a company and somebody that you employed cut you out of 3 years' worth of income? I mean, this is the kind of guy that you would want to see on the evening news, right? You would want to see him on the evening news facing some jail time, looking for some restitution, right? Maybe you'd want to see him on the news and you'd want to see this is the guy that they found at the bottom of some lake or something, okay? You know? Well, a few of you got it. I was joking, okay? But it's crazy that this employer admired him. Well, as we continue on, Jesus kind of tells us what the message is in this parable. What does this parable mean to us? And it is true that the children of this world are more shrewd in dealing with the world around them than the children of the light. Here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then, when your possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. Now, can you see why this parable might be a little perplexing? Why this parable might be a little bit confusing? I mean, it sounds like Jesus is telling us to be like this manager, this crook, this guy that just stole from his employer, this guy that was terrible at his job. It sounds like Jesus is telling us to be like him. That this is the guy that we should follow or we should, emulate. But of course, I mean, you can imagine that can't be what Jesus is saying. I mean, that would go against everything that the Bible tells us how we should live our lives. It goes against the very character of Jesus himself. But I believe Jesus is sharing this parable because he wants to show us something. And he wants to show us that we should embrace God's perspective of money. And see, and there's 3 perspectives in this parable that we can look at, that we should apply to our own lives. And the first one is this: your money is not yours. I mean, think of the story again. Think of the parable. This manager was managing money and resources that weren't his own, right? Sure, he got to kind of enjoy in the benefits of managing the rich man's resources. And, maybe that was one of the things that got him into a little bit of trouble in his current situation. But he got to enjoy the resources of managing those resources. But ultimately, he was to manage those resources to the desire of the rich man, right? He was to manage those resources how his employer wanted him to. It's the same for us, right? The Bible tells us that the things that we have are not ours, right? The Bible tells us that we are stewards, managers of the blessings of God, the things that God has blessed us with. Look what it says in Psalms 50, or listen to what it says. For all the animals of the forest are mine, and I own the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know every bird on the mountains, and all the animals of the field are mine. For all the world is mine, and everything in it. You see, this is one of many verses in the Bible that talks about how God created everything. Right? God created everything, heaven and earth, and everything in them. And that everything is His. Everything belongs to Him. So like a manager, like the manager in the story, sure, we get to enjoy the benefits of managing those resources and the money that God gives us. But ultimately, we're supposed to be managing them and using them for His purposes. Right? His purposes. The second thing that we see in this parable is that this manager got held accountable. We'll be held accountable. See, when the manager got called in and had to give an account for how he was managing the rich man's resources, one day we'll all be in front of God giving an account for how we've managed the resources and the money that He has blessed us with. You know, there's actually another parable in Matthew chapter 25 that talks about this, right? Talks about that there's these three servants, and their master is going away for a long trip. And so he gives each of these servants some money, right? He gives them some money. He goes away for this long trip. Two of these servants actually invested the money. They put the money to work. They managed the money well. And when the master returned, they presented to the master not only what he originally gave them, but what their investment yielded, right? What their investment yielded. And the manager said to him, "Well done. Well done." Well, there's that last servant. That last servant was given some money to manage as well, but he didn't do anything with it. He managed it poorly. He actually ended up burying it and waited until his master returned and presented what his master had given him back to him. He managed it poorly. And his master tells him that he is wicked and lazy. And then threw him out. See, one day we're going to stand before God and be held to account of how we are managing His money, His resources that He has blessed us with. The last thing that I want to point out in this parable is that we are to be shrewd. We are to be like this shrewd manager. I mean, think about how shrewd he was, right? Now, if you're like me, the first time you hear that word shrewd, you think it's like an insult. I did. I kind of thought that if somebody called me shrewd, maybe we need to talk, right? Like somebody's calling me like I'm a conniver or like I'm trying to take advantage of somebody or like I'm doing something evil. But the word shrewd isn't a bad thing to be called at all. Shrewd is being sharp, right? Shrewd is being sharp. It's being clever. It's being wise with something. You see, so in this parable, this manager was being sharp and wise with the resources that he had to accomplish his purpose, right? Some purpose that he had in mind to take care of himself. And he was wise in the way that he handled it to accomplish that. Now, Jesus, God is not telling us to be crooked. God is not telling us to rob rich people or to rob our employer so that we could be better off or to take advantage of people or to hurt people. He's not telling us to do that at all. He's not telling us to do that at all. God wants us to be sharp, clever, and wise with the resources that He has given us, with the money that He is giving us, using it for His purpose. Remember what Jesus told His disciples. He said, "And it is true that the children of this world," speaking of people who aren't pursuing God, the children of this world, people who aren't pursuing God, are more shrewd in dealing with the world around them than are the children of light. The children of light are the pursuers of God, Christians, right? I mean, Jesus is saying that His followers are not shrewd enough with what God has blessed them with to accomplish His purpose. You see, it's important that we embrace God's perspective, right? That we understand that our money is not ours. We're only managing it. To understand that we'll be held account for how we manage it, and that God desires us to be shrewd with it, wise in the way that we use it and spend it. Because there's a danger. If we don't embrace God's perspective, if we don't embrace God's perspective on money, it's going to get confusing, right? Little kind of confusing things start to happen. We start looking at money the wrong way, right? We start managing money the wrong way. We begin to believe that it's ours, and only should be spent on us. We become greedy, right? We view money as kind of a status symbol. We get all confused. And see, the truth is that your spending really does reveal how much God is worth to you. Your spending, the way that you manage God's resources, should tell you how much God is really worth to you. I mean, think of the story again. It's obvious. It's obvious what was most important to this manager, right? It wasn't the rich man. He wasn't concerned about the rich man. It wasn't the people that he gave a break to. He wasn't concerned about them. He was only using them. What was most important to this manager was making sure that his future was protected, right? And it's the same for us as well. Our spending reveals what's most important to us. Remember what Jesus said about the lesson of the parable. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then, when your possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. You see, the worldly resources here that he's talking about is everything that we earn, everything that we receive, and everything that we accumulate throughout our life. Right? These are the resources that God has blessed us with. See, these are the resources that God has given us to manage. And Jesus tells us that we should use these to benefit others and make friends that'll welcome us to an eternal home. Now, that's a little confusing as well. What exactly is Jesus talking about? But think of it like this. Everything that we have, all the money that we make, all the things we accumulate with the money that we make over a lifetime, what's going to happen to all that stuff? Eventually, it's going to be nothing. Right? I mean, some of the stuff, the cars, the phones, some of the stuff that we've already accumulated didn't even outlast us. Right? But one day, all of this stuff is not going to last. It has an end, just like we do. Just like we do. And see, and what Jesus is trying to tell us in this parable is that these resources have been given to us not simply to pour into things that have an end. Not to pour into things that won't outlast us. Not to pour into things that won't outlast our kids. But to pour into things that have an eternal, an everlasting benefit. You see, when we give to God's purposes, this is exactly what we're doing. This is why Jesus said this in Luke chapter 12. Sell your possessions and give to those in need. This will store up treasure for you in heaven. And the purses of heaven never get old or develop holes. Your treasure will be safe. No thief can steal it, and no moth can destroy it. This is how we should want to invest our money and our resources and in things that have an eternal impact. And when we use our money in this way, it truly does reveal to us how important God is to us. Look what Pastor John Piper says about the way we use our money. The possession of money in this world is a test run for eternity. Can you pass the test of faithfulness with your money? Do you use it as a means of proving the worth of God and the joy you have in supporting His cause? Or does the way you use it prove that what you really enjoy is things, not God? See, this is why Jesus said this at the end of the parable. He said, "No one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money." You see, I think many of us don't like the idea of being enslaved to anything, right? But I think that we can all admit that there's been times in our lives where we have been enslaved to money, right? Where we haven't been generous, where we haven't been generous to God's work in the local church, where we haven't been generous to godly missions around the world and ministries around the world, where we haven't been generous to the people right next to us who are in need. The truth is, if we're not being generous, we're simply a slave to our money. We've allowed other things to become more important to us than God. You see, the last thing that I think this parable leads us to is that our generosity, your generosity, gets you welcomed into heaven. Now, I want to be clear. What we're not saying is that you can find salvation by being generous. That if you give to the local church or if you give to the needy that are around you, that for some reason that's going to save you, right? That's not the case. It's not like your generosity is your down payment on your condo in heaven. It doesn't work like that, right? The only way that we can find salvation is by putting our trust in Jesus, right? Believing that Jesus died for us, that it was through Jesus that we can find forgiveness of sins and have a relationship with God. And when you think about Jesus, he was the ultimate example of generosity. I mean, he gave up all his earthly possessions and even went as far to give up his life so that we could have a relationship with God. The ultimate example of generosity. So generosity won't get you into heaven, but your generosity gets you welcomed into heaven. Let's look at Jesus' lesson of that parable one more time. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then, when your possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. Think about that manager. That manager invested the rich man's resources in hope that he would have a home after he was fired, right? Well, Jesus is giving us a picture of a reward here that is far greater than that. Far greater than that. You see, as we give to God's purposes, as we give to the local church, as we give to godly ministries, as we help those in need around us, as we express this generosity, God uses this generosity to bring people to Him. Right? In part, God uses our generosity to save people's lives, to bring people, usher people into a relationship with Him. And can you imagine? Can you imagine the day when your day comes? We all have that day. When that day comes and you pass away, you leave everything here on earth and you go to heaven. And what you find in heaven is a welcome from the people that were saved by your generosity. What you get is a welcome from the people that you don't even know, the people that you didn't even meet. But because you were generous, because you gave, you managed the resources that God gave you wisely, and you gave towards His purposes. God saved souls with using the resources that you gave. And these are the people that welcome you into heaven. People that welcome you into heaven. You see, it's important that we understand God's perspective of money. That money is not ours. We've just been asked to manage it. To remember that we'll be held to account how we manage God's money, and that God desires us to be shrewd with His money to fulfill His purpose for it. See, years ago when I was at a meeting, a business meeting for Alpine Church, several years back, and one of the pastors got up, and he was, we were talking about giving, a business meeting, and one of the pastors got up and he made this statement that kind of rubbed me wrong, right? He said, our giving is the second largest check we write a month, right? And when I was sitting there listening to that, my first reaction was, man, that's kind of arrogant, right? That's kind of arrogant. But the truth is that I I guess, a little envious, right? Because I wasn't being generous. I wasn't being generous, and God was speaking to my heart. Because he wasn't being arrogant at all. He was being shrewd. You see, he was being wise with the resources that God had given him. And he had a goal in mind that the biggest expense or the biggest check that he would write monthly would be written to God's purposes, would be written to accomplishing God's will here on earth, would be written to helping people pursue God. Now, God tells us to give joyously, right? To be joyful about our giving. Be joyful about being generous. Today, I'm happy to say that our giving is the second largest check we write a month. But I want to be shrewd with my giving. I want the resources that God has given me to manage to go towards fulfilling his purpose here on earth. And I hope that one day that it'll be the largest check that we write a month. You see, God wants us to be shrewd. Are you willing to be shrewd? Are you willing to find a way to manage God's resources in a way where you're giving to fulfill his purpose on earth? I know that sometimes we all put ourselves in situations to where, these are things we have to work for, right? Goals that we have to set to try to achieve, right? Being able to give more to God. And sometimes we're in tough financial situations, but there's always a place that we can start giving. Giving here at Alpine Church. The reason I give at Alpine Church is because of this. When I give at Alpine Church, I'm helping people pursue God in Uganda, Ethiopia, Mexico, Papua New Guinea, Philippines, and 7 other nations. You see, I believe that when I give at Alpine Church, when other Alpiners give at Alpine Church, we can accomplish more with our combined giving than we could accomplish for God's purposes on our own. When we give at Alpine Church, we're helping people pursue God from the border of Idaho to central Utah. We're helping people pursue God. And it's easy. We can always start somewhere, right? We can always start somewhere. Are you willing to be generous? Now, for those that, I know that sometimes budgeting and finances can be difficult. So we want to provide a budgeting workshop. If you have a goal to give more, right, towards God's purposes, whether it's here at Alpine Church or other godly ministries that you know about, or simply to give more to the people in need around you. One way that you can work towards that, one way that we can be shrewd at accomplishing that goal, to put more of the resources to God, is to figure out how to budget well and make a plan, being shrewd. So, do you understand God's perspective of money? And are you willing to be shrewd about the way that you give to God? Will you pray with me? Father, we exalt you. And Lord, we truly do give you praise, Father, that you've blessed us with so much. And Lord, I pray that you would just work with each of us individually, Lord. Our giving is between you and us individually. And so, Father, I pray that you would work on our heart, Father, that you would lead us to be more generous. Father, to be more generous. Father, that we would be welcomed into heaven by a host of people who you have saved out of our generosity. So, Lord, we give you praise. We exalt your name. In the name of Jesus, amen.